Greetings hobbyists, this is Artisans of Vol, and in this tutorial we're going to be having a look at how we can use Blender's inbuilt physics systems to create cloth objects such as flags or banners. So this carries on from the last video where we're having a look at how to make cloth in a non-procedural way, just using sculpting and the lattice modifier. It's really worth watching that video as well because those are the sort of things that you might do after you've done this process to add a little bit of extra detail. So the first thing we're going to do is press Shift and A and bring in our cylinder that's going to make up our banner pole. So I'm going to bring that up to, let's say, 128 vertices, so that it's going to be nice and smooth. I want my radius, well, that's going to be whatever my banner pole is. I'm going to talk about that at the end, so please listen to that because it's going to be very important for 3D printing. But I'm not going to do it now just in case people aren't here for 3D printing content. But at the moment I'm leaving that as a radius of 1, so this is a total of 2 millimeters in size, and then I want a depth of about 50. And that's just because of what I know I'm making. Then I want to make the crossbar, so Shift and D to duplicate that, escape so it's in the same place. I'm going to press R and X and then type in 90, and then I'm just going to G and Z that up approximately at this point so that we've got that about there. So this should make a good starting point for this, and obviously we can do extra things with this after we've made our banner, and I will be adding some additional details here, and again I'll talk about that at the end because it's again focused on making sure this is going to be the most relevant it can be for 3D printing. Then I'm actually going to change this by bringing out the end panel and then having a look at the item, and you'll notice we've got this dimension on the Z-axis of 50. Obviously this isn't on the Z-axis anymore, so I'm going to press Ctrl and A, apply the rotation, and then that goes to the right place. I'm going to change that to, let's say, 30. So this is looking a little bit better. So let's start making the flag, or in this case a banner. So Shift and A, and I'm going to bring in a plane, and you'll notice that's very small down there. So let's press S to scale that up to somewhere about there. I don't want this all the way to the end of my flagpole, and then I'm going to press Y and 90 to rotate that round, and you'll notice on the back we've got this. That's just because I have my face orientation on. Most people won't, so I'm going to get rid of that because at this point it's a bit confusing. Then we want to make sure this is in front of the banner pole, so I'm just going to press G to grab it and then X along the X-axis, and I'm going to bring that just a little bit in front of the banner pole. Then let's S on the Z-axis, so S and then Z, probably about there, and then G and then Z to bring it up, and I want that about here will probably do me okay. So just a little bit below where the banner pole actually is. In fact, we could G and Z that up a little bit more, just to about there. So what I'm going to do here, and this is where you're going to get the difference between CG work and this, is I'm not going to start faffing around with the bit that goes over the banner pole straight away. That's something that I find is best left for the end because it gives you the smoothest and easiest to control results. So what we need to do is make this plane suitable for the physics simulation, and to do that we need to break it up into subdivided parts. So let's get on with that. So I'm going to go into edge mode, and you can see this is just one big face. Control and R, and we're going to have one cut down the middle to divide it in half. That's generally quite useful as a way to do it. And then Control and R, and then I want to get these to be approximately square. So that's not square, that's probably the closest to square. So click, and then we can move it up and down. We don't want to do that, so escape, and then we've got that there creating these nice squares. And at this point we can subdivide it more easily, so A, Control and E, and we want to subdivide, and obviously we can bring that up to about 10. Now how much you do this is going to really depend on your computer. Basically, the more you subdivide it, the harder it's going to find the physics simulation, but the smoother the result's going to be. I normally would divide this up quite a lot. Admittedly, me recording this is going to slow my computer down a little bit, so I might do a little less with this. I'm going to break this down to have 50 squares along the top, so I need 25 on each half. Now I'm just going to bring this back to here. Now remember, this is the number of cuts. So we started with just this being one face, and we've done one cut, and now the half, bear in mind we're just talking about the half, is now two faces. So whatever this number is, if we for example put it up to 2, we now get 3 faces per half. So you've got to bear in mind that whatever we do this as the number of cuts, there's going to be one more face, and I want 25 cuts per half, so I'm going to go with 24, something like that. So now there is a total of 50 squares all along the top. If your computer can handle more, feel free to do more, but I'd recommend starting something relatively small. Even this isn't the smallest, especially because we've got quite a long banner. So now whenever we use our physics, we've got some vertices. If I go into vertex mode, you can see all these vertices that are going to be able to move and curve around as it tries to animate different things. So we're looking pretty good. Now we can start with the physics. So everything physics related is found once you click on the object in the physics panel. I think this is meant to be something orbiting a planet, and if we click on there, we've got the different things that we can do, and there are a lot of different options here, but we're going to start with this one, and we want this to be animated as cloth, and we suddenly get all of this information there. We're not going to look at everything. It would be a tutorial that would last hours. We are going to look at a few bits that are important though. So let's get going with this and let's see what happens. First thing we do to set this going is we use this at the bottom, which is our playback timeline. If you don't have this, it might be that at some point you've got rid of it, so it looks like this. To bring that up, all you need to do is take your mouse, go to a corner, so for example here or here, not just the bottom, it's got to be a corner where you will find your mouse changes to a crosshair. Click and pull up and you'll get another viewport tab, and all you do is come up here, go to timeline, and it changes it to this timeline, and we don't need that much space. We just need to see where the marker is, and this is what you'd normally do for creating animations if that's what you're interested in. I'm going to bring that down. We just really need to see where it is, and then all we need to do is press play or press the space bar. And oh, okay, that's not working. It's just falling. That's because Blender, as standard, has gravity, and at the moment there's nothing to keep it in place. So let's sort that out. I'm going to bring that back to 0, and that's always worth doing. You can also just click there and it brings it back to the beginning. So let's start adding in some fixed points so this isn't going to fall. So I'm going to go into edge mode, and I'm going to come down here to my object data properties. And the way we do this is by adding a vertex group. If you haven't seen any of my videos that have vertex groups in them and you don't know what a vertex group is, it's essentially a series of vertices within an object that we are assigning a slightly different command to, or we're asking to either do something to those or not do something to those. We'll show that in a second. Now, I want essentially 4 bits coming up and looping around my banner. And again, we're not going to do the loops now, but we need to hold the bits in place that are going to form those loops. So I'm just going to press Alt and click on this top edge. Now we've got a total of 50 across here. I picked that number because it means I can divide these up in a way that I want. So all we're going to do is press Select and then check a deselect. And what that does, which is really fancy, is that it just turns one unselected, one selected, one deselected, one selected, and you can see that down here. So we want to change this around. So what I want to do is I want to have every 5 selected, and then I want to have, let's say, 10 that aren't going to be selected in between, and you'll notice that we've got this big missing gap, and we can change where these are, but we're never going to get this perfect. And you can see here they seem to be coming out of this point. Now what I'm going to do is undo this, so Control and Z to where this was all selected, and you can see why this is. Hopefully the point here, this is where when I press Alt and clicked, this is where I clicked. It's the active element. Even though all this is selected, Blender's paying particular attention to here. So when we start doing our checker deselect, it does it from here, which is causing our problems. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to re-Alt and click just at this end here, and you'll notice now we've got the same bit selected, but our active element, the bit in white, is this last one. You could do it the other end as well. It doesn't make a difference, but you've got to make sure that's done. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. So for all you out there that have tried using checker deselect and it doesn't seem to work nicely, this is why. The active bit's very important. So select, checker deselect, and then we've got the same thing, and we can move where that is with the offset. So I want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you'll notice if you go any further, I'm looking at this side here. I should have been clear about that. So we can move the offset to where that is, and we want 5 selected, and then we've got 10 unselected, 5 selected, 10, 5, 10, and 5, and because that adds up to a total of 50, this is perfect. So we've got the ones selected that we don't want to move anywhere, and we're going to assign those to a vertex group. So I'm going to press plus. Now notice this only creates a vertex group. These haven't been assigned to it yet. So I want to click on this. I'm going to call it pinned verts, and then I need to click assign. And that means that now these are assigned to that group. Beforehand they weren't. And if you want to check that's worked, just click deselect and select, and then that's your easy way of checking. Back into object mode. Back to the physics tab, And if we go down here, I'm going to hide the physics properties for now, go down to shape, and we've got pinned groups. Click on that, pinned vertices, and we want to have this stiffness to 1. What's really cool is you can affect this. So at the moment it's 1, which means they shouldn't move at all. If we change that down, then it affects the amount they're going to move. So you can make it so they can still move a little bit, for example, if this was just more a rigid part of your cloth, but it still has some movement. I don't want these moving at all, so I'm leaving that as 1. And then we can press the space bar again. And you're going to notice we get a little bit of movement, but not very much at this point. You can see that here. And that's because these are relatively taut and they're keeping everything in place. Now at this point, you can start fiddling with settings, and what you do with that is up to you. For example, if I come back to the physical properties, we've got some nice things here like the stiffness, and we've got the tension, the compression, the shear, the bending. And that's basically, if you hold your mouse over it, it will tell you what it does. That resists any sort of shearing. The one that I really like is the tension, which is how much the material resists stretching. So if we put that down to, let's say, 5 and play again, it will have a little bit more curve there. Put that down to 1, back to the beginning, start again. And notice it's got a little bit more. You can mostly see that at the bottom where it's got a bit more bounce. But that's looking pretty good at this point, but it doesn't look like a banner. And that's mostly because there's no movement going on here to allow it to look like a banner. So we need to start bringing some things in that are going to affect this. And the one thing that's really good for this is either some sort of wind or some sort of force. So let's bring that in. Shift and A, and then we want force fields. And some people use force fields. I generally prefer wind. It just seems to be a little bit more controllable for me, and it gives a bit more variation, whereas that's a single constant force. So wind, and you'll notice this is here. I'm going to press G to move it to the side just so we can see this. And at the moment, the wind is in the direction of these arrows. So it's moving upwards. We don't want that. We're going to want that from a direction. Now, this is going to be massively dependent on your view of your miniature. If this is going to be a thing moving forward, you probably want the wind. If I just, let's RX and bring that round to about there. You might want your wind, in fact, S to scale that up a bit. So if I G and then R there, if you want your model walking forward, you might want your wind from the front, which is going to then blow the banner backwards and going to give it a view like it's moving forwards. If you want your scene to have a wind direction from a side, you might instead want to have it over, let's say here, and then have it coming in from the side. Or if you want it moving forward while that wind is coming from the side, you might want to bring it somewhere here and have it at an angle. So you've got loads of options there, and if you come to the physics tab here where you've got the information about this, you can see you've got things like strength, and if I up the strength, you can see those get further apart, so you can see how much strength this has got. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that up to, let's say there. We can have a look at what this is going to do to our banner. And there is a problem that we've already got here. If any of you know physics, then you'll know what that problem is going to be. But let's have a look at this. So notice straight away we've got the wind blowing our banner. Very, very nice. Now, we've got a few problems straight off. Firstly, it went straight through the pole. That's not great. And although we don't have it here, at the moment, this has got the ability to potentially go through itself. But you can see how we're getting this very nice movement with very little work. So let's bring that back to 0 and let's sort these problems out. So first thing, let's click on the cloth. Notice the physics properties change back to the cloth. And I'm going to hide the physical properties and go all the way down to collisions. And at the moment, it has object collisions, which is interesting because it should have collided into an object. We'll talk about why it didn't in a second. And we've got self collisions, which are turned off. We want to put that on straight away. Then, the reason this didn't collide with this object is because it doesn't have any physical properties. Now, this is going to be an object that can be collided with, so we just need to click collision. Now, it shouldn't hit this top bar, but I'm going to put collision on that as well, just to make sure in case anything weird happens and it flips up. that it does. And now, if we press the spacebar, oh, look how nice that is. Now, you'll notice it's going back and it is hitting against each other, and that's because we've got the collisions on for self-collision. Now, this wind is possibly a bit strong at the moment. It's looking a bit much. Maybe you want your banner to look like this. Don't know. That could look really cool, but that's how we do it. So let's go back, all the way back to 0, and we're going to affect this. And I'm going to bring this strength down to, let's say, 20, and let's see what effect that has. So something like that. Okay, again, possibly a bit much. I might actually add a little bit more to the side for this. So, but either way, you can see what we're doing here, and you can see how easy that looks. And the important bit is that you can move this around once it's done to see where you are. So for example, you might be like, I like that, and that's where I want this to be. And then we'd affect this object. Now, we have got a few other things we want to tweak. The first is that, notice this is very close to the banner pole when it's doing this. Now, the reason for that is that when we come to our, let's click here, and our collision settings, we've got a distance of 0.015 at the moment, which means that's the distance between the cloth, and we almost imagine that there's like a force field around the things it's going to collide with. Now, we're going to add some thickness to this object later. We're going to add a solidify modifier to the cloth so it's 3D printable, and that means that would basically go through the banner at this point, which is okay, but let's add a little bit more space. So at the moment we're here, and my increments are 1mm. So I'm actually going to bring this a little bit further out to about there, and I'm going to change this distance to about 0.5. And for the distance, I'm going to bring that up to the most it can be, which is 0.1 of a millimeter. And now when I press space, and I'm just going to stop there. Oh, just as a point of importance, if yours is being a lot slower than this to do the first animation, okay, whenever it does it the first time and you're creating this blue line, which is it basically saving internally or caching this, yours might take a lot longer to set up. That will be to do with how powerful your computer is and how many squares you've got here when we subdivided it. So if I go to the subdivisions here, if you doubled the amount of this, it's going to take a lot longer. So let's go back to here, start again, and just going to pause here, and you can see it's maintaining this gap around the pole. So that changing of the collision distance is really useful. At this point, it's just fiddling to get the effect you want, and then we're going to talk about the rest of it. So I'm going to just fiddle now until I get the sort of look that I want. And this is mostly tweaking things like the actual wind speed, so the strength, and then the direction and location of the wind. And it just depends on what you want to have as your final effect. Okay, so I'm just about happy with this now, but let's talk about a few more settings that you might want to use. The first for the wind is the noise. Now, the noise is the amount of variation in the wind. At the moment, it's got a strength of 18, which is what I seem to like, but it's constantly blowing at 18. By adding any amount of noise, we vary that to have maybe more or less strength. So, for example, with 10, this should go up to at points 28 and down at points to about 8. So we can sort of have a look at that, and it's going to give a little bit more of a varied effect. And that's going to, in this setting, make that bottom bit maybe twitch around a little bit more. So it's going to give a slightly more interesting effect. Now with that done, we might want to change the strength to be a little lower, or have the noise amount a little bit lower. Something that's going to just be totally up to you. That's going to depend on what you want. Now the other thing is when you do this, it only goes up to 250, and then it replays it a lot faster because it's now been stored. And you can see this looks much nicer when you actually look at that faster replay. If you want this to go further, you want this end to go up to 500, but this still won't do anything. It's still only going to go up to 250. Okay, so here it's frozen, it's still going further, but that's frozen. Let's bring that all the way back to the beginning. What you need to do for that is click on your cloth and then come all the way down to the cache. And then here you've got simulation starts at 1, it ends at 250. If you put that up to 500, now when you press play again or place the spacebar, it is going to carry on going. Now I'm just speeding that up just so you can see that it does go up to 500, but you're not going to lose your sanity just watching this slowly drag by up to 500. So that's quite useful to get a good range of movement. So other settings that are important to play with. The first one is that you've got here the physical properties and you've got a mass for each of your vertices. And essentially that's how much it weighs, for want of a better word. I quite like bringing that up a little bit, especially with the way that I've set this up here, because what that will do is it will mean that it's going to sag more. And that's going to give a much nicer look to this, especially when we're going to have this going over the banner. So that's quite an important one to do, to have that. Now this is going to create a little bit more of an extreme effect on those vertices, so this is where you're going to want to play around with some of your settings down here. For example, this is being caused by the compression. This doesn't allow the vertices to compress very much, so we don't want that as high. So again, I'm just fiddling. I'm going to bring that down to about 5, and it's going to need the material to sort of shear on itself a little bit more, so I'm going to bring that down to about 1, something like that. And then we can play that again, and you'll see we should have resolved a lot of those problems. So there is this sort of playing around. You'll notice now it is stretching a lot, like far too much. So we're going to have to do something about that. And again, this is all just playing around, really. Like, you need to just get used to this and start having a fiddle with it. For example, to stop that stretching, I want to probably up the tension, I don't know, 5. We'll see how this looks. So we've still got some stretching here, but not as much at the bottom. So immediately that looks much better, and you're getting this much more interesting sort of flow, something like we'd want for a banner. Now my recommendation is that you leave this run for quite a bit of time, and I know we can't see this, but we can see where it's up to here, and that gives you the most options, because what we're going to do is essentially go through this and decide the point that we want. The final thing that I should mention that is well worth playing around with, if I come back to the beginning, is you can have more than one wind. If I Shift and D, rotate that round to somewhere like there, and then, I don't know, bring that down, and then maybe affect the strength of it so it's not as strong. So let's bring that strength down to, I don't know, 10. And noise amount, let's have that so it varies a bit, so I'm going to have that about 15. And do we want a bit more noise on this one? Let's put that up to 20. Let's just see what it looks like. And then again, play, and now it's being affected by both the winds. So it's going to curve around the banner a bit more. Maybe that's too much. It depends where you want this to be flowing. But yeah, you can have more than one wind. I generally limit this to maybe 2 or 3, but you'll notice this noise here is creating the interesting effect. Sometimes it pushes back, sometimes it comes further forward, and that's because of the variation in the noise, which means that you're effectively getting gusts of wind. If you're using something like the plain force fields, that's not something you can do, I believe. So we get a lot of different things that we can play with here. I might even actually up the noise amount there to 20. Let's bring that back and start that again. That might make this too high on the extremes. We'll have a look at what it does. As I said, if your computer has too much problems or this is very slow, my strong recommendation is just leave it to play out. Then once it's played out, you can go through much faster. So it might be you go and get a T or something, or just bring down the amount of squares or subdivisions that you've got on your object. And now we get to the part where we're going to make this look better. So the first thing I'm going to do is add in a subdivision surface modifier, which is just going to smooth everything out. Now the number of levels you do for this is entirely up to you, and do note that it is having an effect on these edges. Here, if you don't want that to happen, all you need to do is Alt select those edges, and then I'm going to Shift Alt select the other ones. There, and there. And I'm going to Shift and E and bring that all the way to the side till it's purple. If on the end panel you bring this out, it brings the mean crease up to 1, which means that we've got this sharp resolution. Now if we play this, this is going to slow everything down quite a bit, but it should look smoother. So we don't have these angular sort of bits, and we can actually bring that up to about 2, and you'll notice it makes it a lot smoother again. If I zoom in a little bit further, more angular, smoother, very smooth, and so on. So that's just our way of making this look much nicer, and oh, look how good that looks. Fantastic. So now is the point where I'm going to play this through and decide where I like the look of this, and you can obviously do this by hand to just flow through. I should say if you go further than it's cached, the bit that's in purple, so notice once you bring it back to 0, it doesn't like it anymore, so you sort of have to redo it. But this is going to be saving everything, and you just watch it through, and if you want to look back, you can do. For example, I might go back to there and say, oh, where do I like this? Just carry on playing to the point where you get to something that you think looks good on your cloth material. So for example, I quite like there. Lots of motion, some interesting folds. That's pretty much what I want. At this point, for our cloth modifier, we need to go to our physics tab and we need to say this is what we want. I'm happy with this. So I'm going to go to my cache and I'm going to bake this current cache. So I'm going to click on that, and now that's pretty much saved. And then here I can click apply, and now this is there. It's done. Now we've still got our subdivision surface modifier. When you decide to have this sort of confirmed, that's up to you. And notice if you want to, you can still bring this down so that we can work with this more easily. And now we're going to fix the top part of our banner, just here. But do notice that now all of our vertices are confirmed. They're here. We're not changing these around. Or if we do decide to change them around, we'll be doing that with different tools. So let's go back into this. So I find the easiest way to do this is to come back into our object data properties, go into vertex mode, click off, and then I can select just those ones. So we've still got that there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press E to extrude those over there. E, E, and E, somewhere to about there. Then when I go out of object mode, we've got this here. And our subdivision surface doesn't look like it's working, but it is. It's just that at the moment, all of these edges are considered to be sharp. So let's come back here, select those, and look how good this is. It's selected everything. That's because it's come from the vertices that were originally part of this group. So what we can do now is press N, go to the mean crease, and take that down to 0. And we've got this nice and smooth. Excellent. Now I would recommend, just for the sake of your own sanity, that you do select these edges there and bring that mean crease back up to 1 and do that for each of these. So we're going to go there, and I do want this to affect the bottom one as well. So let's just keep that selected. Then I want that one, there, 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 and there. Bring that back up to 1, so it's not going to be affected by our subdivision surface. And then we can bring our subdivision surface up, and we've got this nice smooth curve around. We might decide that we want to do more with this bit at the bottom. It's up to you where you want that going into. For example, I've before brought this down to somewhere like, oh, that's Shift and Z, so we've selected all of those, somewhere to about there. You can go higher if you want to. It's totally up to you, just so that everything sort of keeps in place. I'm going to leave that there for now and then see how this looks with our solidify modifier. Back to our modifiers, add modifier, and we want to solidify. And at the moment this is relatively thin, and we're going to straight away have a problem that we haven't applied our scale. So Control A, scale, and that goes back to 1. Then we want to have a look at how far this is solidifying. I want this at least 1 millimeter. Minimum of 1 millimeter. No way it should be less than that. Otherwise it's not going to print. You're going to have a lot of issues. And we are going to have some little bits to fix here, but nothing too much. So somewhere like that looks pretty good. You could do higher than 1 millimeter if you wanted to. Like 1.5 is not a bad thing. And also notice it is going to get quite thin here. Now, this is the thing that I said I wanted to talk about at the end, because it's to do with 3D printing. So I'll come to that as I come to it. So first things first, let's fix some of these vertices. So vertex here, that one definitely wants to G and Y somewhere about there. Any overlap here? No, that looks okay. That looks okay. That one looks fine there. Fine there, fine there. A little bit here. So G, Y, and let's just bring that in a little bit so it's nicely tucked in. So pretty easy fix there. So at this point, let's get this applied. So we've got our different bits here. We need to apply all of those, and then we've got this done. Now, I will say we've still got a problem to fix here. At the moment, these are still going inside. We've got what we'd refer to as intersecting faces, and this will stop this being a manifold object. So we do need to sort that. Now there are two answers to this. The first is that you just leave it with that problem there, and then what you can do is to take this into 3D Builder, and that will generally fix that problem. I'm going to go that route for this because it's going to take less time. The other option is you could remesh this. So to do that, you're going to tab, go into sculpt mode, and you're going to go through the remesh options. I have covered those in some of the other sculpting videos, so I'm not going to cover them now, but I will say that generally comes up with its own little problems that you're going to have to fix, and it will leave these edges not quite as sharp. So let's go through this and see if this will get fixed. Now this does cause one other problem, which is sometimes this will cause problems with doing further booleans. And that again is going to depend on your decisions next. Let's H that and hide those. So if you're not interested in 3D printing, this bit is going to be totally irrelevant to you. You can switch off, and I hope you found this useful. But if you are 3D printing this, we're going to need to boolean these together. Now I haven't finished with this pole yet. We're going to make that look a little better. But the important bit here is this pole, which if you remember is 2 millimeters wide, it's going to be pretty well supported by our banner going all the way along here. And when we merge everything together, this should be fine. It's probably going to create some little vertex errors here where we've got these tiny little faces, but we can have a look at that. But this should look pretty good. But it's going to create a notable weak point here, which with some weight above it, is potentially a point it's going to snap. Because of that, I very rarely 3D print this as one solid object. I did it in the past, it looked great, and then it snapped. So that's up to you if you want to take that risk. My personal solution to this is I take this banner and I increase the thickness to, let's say, 2.2 on all sides. So now this is thicker, so I've just done that on the X and Y, and then you'll notice this causes a nasty overlap here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into edge mode, Control and R to bring in an edge loop, Control and B to bevel it to a little bit wider, and then I'm going to go into face mode and I'm going to extrude these out. You can either do that over here by going to extrude along normals, something like that, and then depending on how you want this to look, you can either cut this out of that, or you can make a little bit for this to slot into, which adds a little bit more support as well. So I'm actually going to do that. So I'm going to Shift and D, this S, Shift and Z to scale it, but not on the Z axis. Make it wider to somewhere about there, maybe a little bit less, let's say about there. And then I'm going to go into vertex mode, Shift and Z to X-ray, and then G and Z those all the way up. So we've got this little bit here where this is going to slot into. And then all I need to do is boolean this together. In fact, I might S and Shift Z scale that a tiny bit more. There we go. It should cause less problems, hopefully, when booleaning it together. Same thing on the edge here. I want to go into edge mode, Control and R, bring that to somewhere like there, and then face mode, Shift and Z, select those faces, and this time I'm going to do this with hard ops because it's quicker. It's the same as using the options over here, but Q, press Alt on the macro, and then you can just bring that to be a bit wider. And then object mode, and then Alt X, and I'm going to make sure this is on symmetry, and then symmetrize that to the side. That was using machine tools. If you don't have that, you're just going to have to apply a mirror modifier. And then here and here, Control and plus on the number pad, H to hide that, and we've got this one object, and we can apply that modifier. So now we've got our banner pole and we've got somewhere for this to neatly slot into. So let's go through the final stages of this. At the moment, this needs to be added to this. This is where we might get problems here. So Control and plus, is this going to like it? No, it's not. And this is because of this problem that we've got here. So let's do that again, Control and plus, and then where this hasn't worked, I'm going to change that to fast, and this will have worked. It's now booleaned everything together, but it's going to have some issues. So let's apply all there, and then this and this one, Control and this time minus. So I should have showed you that edit preferences. The way to use your number pad to do these booleans without having to do it very slowly here is if you go to add-ons, type in bool and activate bool tool and save preferences. If you don't have a number pad, then you're going to have to do this a bit more slowly. For example, I might go here, add modifier, boolean, and I want to have a difference boolean, and then click the cylinder, and I need to hide the cylinder, and we can see we've got this nice hole taken out of this, and this is where our banner pole is going to slot in nicely. So that's how we're going to do this. Now, we are going to have problems, as I said. This is not going to be a manifold object. I'm going to apply all here, so we've got this done, and we'll see how messed up this is. So 3D print, check all, and because of the number of vertices, this is going to take a while. So here we can see we've got a lot of issues. We've got a lot of non-manifold edges and badly config edges. Let's actually quickly talk through what these are, just for people that don't know. If I go into edge mode and then click on this, it will highlight where this is, and most of these will be in this area. So we've got lots of these. We've got all of these areas here where we've got problems internally with these edges. For example, this or these faces shouldn't be here. If I go into face mode, look, that whole face and all of these ones, they shouldn't be here. They're inside a manifold object. Then we've got intersecting faces. Intersecting faces are caused when you've got two faces going into each other in a way they shouldn't. For example, this face here carries on into this face here. We don't want that, and that shouldn't be happening. And again, here you can see this face goes straight into this one, and this is a problem with the technique that we used earlier to just bring these round. Wasn't the best technique, but it does work, and we'll talk about how to fix that in a second. And then importantly, we also have non-flat faces. These would be good examples of non-flat faces where you've got something, well, essentially that Blender is confused by and doesn't think is flat. For example, if we look at this one, we can see here, well, we've got 2 points here, but on this side we've got 3 vertices, and this is confusing Blender. If I just clicked on that one and that one, press M and at last, that will fix that issue. So these are fixable. Now, I would say that this non-manifold object where we've got these non-manifold edges would be quite a time-consuming thing to fix because there's a lot of them. Look at all of them. They're everywhere. So we do have, or would have, quite a bit of work there. But we're going to try and be a little bit lazy. Now, the one thing that you should notice is that this technique doesn't always work. It generally works okay, but sometimes you'll find that it doesn't work perfectly and you need to come back in here and start sorting this out manually. So I'm going to select this object, which is the one that I want to export. File, Export, STL, and then I'm going to call this Banner. And before you click anything, make sure you click Selection Only. Otherwise, it will import everything that's in this file, and that's not what you want. You only want the selected things. So export STL, and then that should be saved. Importantly, this hasn't actually saved the Blender file though, so if you do want to save your Blender file, now is the time to do that. And let's go over to 3D Builder and see if it can solve our problems. So this is 3D Builder. It's a fairly unassuming program, and to be honest, I've tried making things on 3D Builder. It's not particularly good at it. I mean, it's fine for basic objects and things like that, but what it is very good at is fixing issues. So I'm going to come to where we've got our banner, open it, and then it's going to load the file up. We're going to pick our units, which I was working in millimeters. The file didn't say millimeters. I've got a video on Blender units if you want to have a look at it. The link's in the top right hand corner and in the description, so you might find that interesting. But either way, this was millimeters, and then you'll notice we've got this red square around our object, and one or more objects are invalidly defined. Click to repair. We're going to click it, and it's going to start repairing it. And with that number of issues, this might take a little bit of time. Let's see. So here we have, and it now should be fixed. Just so you know, obviously I cut that out because I didn't want anyone to be bored staring at a screen. That took about 2.5 minutes to fix. So menu, save as, and then when you save it, you need to change that to STL, and then I normally call it something else like checked. And then if we come into a slicer, I generally use Lychee. I find it to be one of the best ones. Add files, and then let's open that up. And hopefully we should get this in here and it's not going to find any problems with it. And there we go. No structural issues. And we've got our 3D printable object ready to go. Hopefully you found that useful, both from the point of view of making this cloth structure, but also looking at how to make sure that these are 3D printable and a couple of those workarounds to make your life a little bit easier. As always, if you've got any questions or anything else you'd like to see on the channel, please do say in the comments section. And if you aren't subscribed, please do so. It really helps the channel and makes it a little bit more visible to other people. I hope to see you next time, and have a great day.